Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Van Ostenbridge. I'm Manatee County Commissioner in District 3, and I invited you all here today because I've started a GoFundMe in an effort to raise money for 16 families who were displaced in this fire that took place on November 6th. I was actually on a ride-along with Manatee County Sheriff's Office that night, and we responded to this fire, so I can attest to some of the horrible things that were experienced that night by these families, and as well as the bravery that we saw from one father and our first responders that night. In the end, we had 16 families displaced. It was a 4-alarm fire. So Cedar Hammock, the City of Bradenton, West Manatee, and Southern Manatee fire departments all responded, as well as Manatee County EMS. 4 children were pediatric traumas and were flown up to Tampa General. At one point in time, a local park nearby, GT Bray Park, there were 3 helicopters at one time landing on the soccer fields there. And it was pretty moderate winds that night as well. I witnessed everything from CPR to firemen literally running into burning buildings to save people. One pet was lost, but many were saved. In the end, thanks to the heroics of our first responders and that father, and to the grace of God, no one died in this event. 6 people were transported to trauma centers, but in the end, everyone survived. But now, all these families have lost their possessions. Right? The Red Cross gave them a debit card with $900 on it the night of the fire, which is greatly appreciated. But as we all know, if you have a family, $900 doesn't take you very far, especially when you have no place to go. So I started this GoFundMe. We've raised $12,500 so far. And this weekend is going to be the final push to raise money for the families, because on Monday I want to start distributing the money to the families, Monday of next week, in time for Thanksgiving. They have medical bills, of course. They've been displaced from their home, and they also have virtually all of their possessions have been lost at this point. So, and I thank the community. We have raised, as I said, $12,500, and that has been some people that I called and asked to contribute money, but the vast majority of those, it's over 100 contributors, and the vast majority of those people either contributed anonymously or they were names on the list that I did not recognize. So we're very, very happy that the community has come together so far, but we're hoping to make one last push to help these families before Thanksgiving holiday.
Have you spoken to any of the victims?
I have. I've chosen for this press conference, though, to sort of respect everyone's privacy and not speak, about any specific families or anything that they're specifically going through individually.
Well, what physically did you see? I mean, did you see any of the kids coming out of stretchers? I mean, tell us
when I arrived, we turned the corner off of Cortez Road, and upon arrival, there was about 30 feet of fire coming out of the second story of this building. And it was a fairly chaotic scene upon arrival. Cedar Hammock Fire Department was just pulling up on the scene. There were people shouting that there were still people and children and pets inside of burning buildings, and Cedar Hammock Fire Department acted heroically and immediately went straight into what was an inferno at the time.
Did you help at all?
So the Sheriff's Department, I followed the Sheriff's Department to non-burning buildings, and we knocked on doors and evacuated the rest of the complex. And so even those folks who did not suffer fire damage to their apartments, they ended up spending most of the evening, a cold night, sitting in a parking lot next door on Cortez Road.
So you participated in some of the evacuation?
In the evacuation. I participated in the evacuation. That was the extent of my participation.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Talk a little bit about how, witnessing an event like this, I mean, obviously people see this on the news and they see the pictures and it's tragic. But witnessing this event really, caused you to get even more involved and try to start raising money for these families.
Sure.
So, try to bring that to people who are just watching this on the news about how horrific this actually was.
Sure. So, upon arrival, as I said, it was a chaotic scene when we arrived. However, as first responders showed up, things calmed very quickly. First responders were calm and deliberate in all of their actions. And that was obvious, I think, to the residents here, the victims here, to really everyone that was around, that things were under control upon arrival. They had the fire under control within an hour. They immediately began evacuating people in a very systematic and calm way. And they went straight into the danger where it was and literally saved lives. And I think everyone is just extremely grateful that they were properly equipped and that they reacted appropriately at that time.
This has impacted 16 families. How has it impacted you being here just by chance on that ride along, seeing what happened and then processing it afterwards?
Sure. Something that I've realized since the campaign that I hope that this will help everyone else realize is people think of West Bradenton and they think of the islands as these very affluent communities, but the truth is that the meat and potatoes of West Bradenton are working families and blue collar families. And this should remind all of us that a lot of these folks are paycheck to paycheck working families, and they were given $900 by the Red Cross, which is much appreciated. But outside of that, the apartment complex gave them their deposit back and their last month's rent, and they sort of got patted on the behind and sent on their way. And so really the purpose of this press conference is to say that, when the sun came up the next morning, that wasn't the end of the story. We're thrilled that night that lives were saved. But when the sun comes up the next morning, these people have to go on with their lives, and they're still and very much in a bad way. And, here we are knocking on the holidays. So if anything else, I think this just should remind me and everyone else that the heart and soul of our community are working families.
What do you think this money is going to do for them?
I'm hoping to hit 16,000 for 16 families and give them, each $1,000 sort of cash infusion as they head into the holidays, and hopefully this can make their holiday a little more enjoyable. Perhaps some of them, it floats them until they're able to get into another apartment somewhere. As we all know, it's a very difficult housing market, and you can't just walk up to an apartment complex and expect to, move in within a few days. So this may have to float these folks a little longer, a few more days or a week or so, until they're able to move into an apartment.
Do you know what's next for this building, and is there anything being done in the other buildings so that we don't have a repeat?
So the cause of the fire was a dryer vent, and I have not spoken with the apartment complex about what they plan to do. I'm sure they're cleaning all of the dryer vents and going around and inspecting them. This building appears to be a total loss.
Does this make you think about affordable housing and how we need it?
It does. So the county commission had a long discussion last night about the issue of affordable housing in Manatee County and in the entire state of Florida. We're putting together our state agenda packet before we go up to Tallahassee to ask for money. And inflation in the last year has hit housing particularly hard, especially in Manatee County. We still have huge numbers of people moving into Florida, over 1,000 people a day, and at times it feels like half of them are moving to Manatee County. And so, there's a lot of growth going on out east, but that has added to the pressure in West Bradenton because there's really no room to expand, and we really haven't added any homes in West Bradenton. So inflation has had a significant impact.
What was some feelings you had here that night when you were seeing what was happening? Was it scary? Was it traumatic? What were you feeling?
Sure. I think when I first arrived, my feeling was the same as everyone else, as I was terrified that people were going to perish in the fire. And then I watched firemen running into the buildings, and I was terrified that something would happen to them while they were in the fire. But then a little bit of calm did start to set in as it was clear that the first responders, clearly knew what they were doing. They were working together, and they had the scene, fairly under control. And you felt better when you saw the sheriff's department evacuating everyone else out into the other parking lot, that you knew that at least things were contained into one building, and that the fire department was attacking that building as viciously as they could.
Was it emotional at all?
It was certainly emotional to see a fireman giving CPR to an infant. It was certainly emotional to see people screaming that children were in burning buildings, yes.
And you talk about, the heroics of those firemen and the heroics of the father, who helped get people out. And, for the week after, that's all people talk about is the heroics,
Sure.
And you mentioned that this is something you're trying to even more so talk about the aftermath, So,
right.
Talk a little bit more
Sure.
about that.
It's important to recognize the heroics of our first responders, but this press conference is also to remind people that there is an aftermath for these families, and that the days and the weeks that follow don't necessarily get easier for them. They've been displaced in their home, they've lost all of their possessions, and they sort of have to, to a certain extent, start over. We're fortunate that every life was saved, but there is an impact to your life when you're displaced from your home leading into the holidays.
In addition to yourself, can you tell us more about what the rest of the community or other participants and who also is trying to help out,
Sure.
help the family?
So we have had members of the community reach out. Bayside Church, the Bridge Church. There was a third church. We've had several churches that have reached out to ask what they can do. I did have the county assign a social worker to this case to try and help these families and to sort of coordinate the relief effort. And the American Red Cross, of course, has stepped in right away to help. The Salvation Army has stepped in to help, and Tidewell Hospice has offered counseling to all of these families as well. And then, of course, members of the community. We've had over 100 members of our community that have donated financially.
Kevin, when does the GoFundMe end? And once that does end, these families are still going to have needs. What else can the community do after the GoFundMe ends?
Sure. So I would say that most likely the Red Cross and Bayside Church would be the appropriate organizations to contact after this week. I'm going to shut down the GoFundMe on Monday simply because I feel it's important to get these folks some cash relief before the holiday.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. Thank you all so much for coming. And I think we want to emphasize to folks that, as Joe just asked, we are going to end the GoFundMe on Monday. So, if any donations we can get over the weekend are very much appreciated.